Hello Bond fans and welcome to the Bond Bulletin. I recently rewatched A View to a Kill, which was of course Roger Moore's final outing in his 007 tenure, and a film with this guy, Christopher Walken. Oh, do we all love Christopher Walken? And you might wonder why it says epic fail right here. It does so because while I was watching the film, I just couldn't shake the feeling that his master plan, Operation Mainstrike, would have actually left him very much bankrupt instead of super rich. So I did a bit of research, had a look at the macroeconomic data of 1985 as well as the microchip market at that time, and the results were quite stunning. It is safe to say that even if James Bond had never entered the frame in this film, Operation Mainstrike would have become a catastrophic, disastrous, epic corporate failure. And here's why. Zorin's biggest mistake was a massive miscalculation of market geography. He thought that Silicon Valley was the entire global chip market. Of course, in reality, in 1985, the year the film was released, it was the exact year where that balance of power shifted across the Pacific. By 1985, US chip manufacturers had seen their global market share shrink to 45%, while Japanese tech giants like Toshiba, NEC, and Hitachi had exploded to 40% of the market. This was specifically the case in the DRAM market. DRAM is short for Dynamic Random Access Memory, where Japan alone controlled 80 to 90% of global sales for memory chip generations. So, wiping Santa Clara County off the map wouldn't actually eliminate Zorin's competition. The opposite would be the case. It would dramatically strengthen the global market position of Japanese firms, while the surviving American producers outside of that blast zone, as well as European giants and emerging Asian competitors, would simply scramble to fill the remaining void. So let's look at that chaotic 1985 market shock. Zorin timed his master plan to a year where the semiconductor industry was already suffering from an oversupply recession. His plan to artificially control the market completely falls apart under a real economic analysis. For example, there would be a dual shock mess. Destroying Silicon Valley creates a simultaneous downward demand shock, which means wiping out local computer manufacturers who buy microchips, and it would also create a downward supply shock, where it's wiping out the local chip production. So, instead of a clean price spike, the global market would fragment in chaos. Zorin thinks fewer chips equal higher prices, but when you look at the markets, you will find that they are not actually that polite. There is a pricing power illusion. Because massive global competitors remain entirely untouched outside of California, Zorin cannot, under any circumstances, guarantee monopoly pricing. He has absolutely no leverage to dictate terms to surviving global buyers, like, for example, IBM. Another flaw in Zorin's plan is wiping out the consumer ecosystem. As we know, a microchip is a component, not actually a consumer product. It requires a massive ecosystem of hardware manufacturers, software developers, and computer assembly plants to have any kind of real value. If we look back at Silicon Valley as it was in 1985, it wasn't a town that was just building chips. It was a town that built computers who used them, like Apple, but invented the Macintosh at exactly the same time. So, Operation Mainstrike, flooding the valley, Zorin would have eradicated a massive vital piece of the customer ecosystem that bought microchips in bulk. He would be left holding the world's largest supply of a product while dealing with a deeply disrupted global supply chain and a missing tech hub, which is Silicon Valley. And then there's the capital markets blind spot. Max Zorin operates under the textbook delusion that high barriers to entry are permanent barriers to entry. While 1980s fabrication plants were enormously expensive, they weren't magical. Now let's assume Silicon Valley disappears underwater. What would actually happen? Global markets would respond instantly. Investors would aggressively flood billions of dollars into surviving semiconductor firms to expand their capacity rapidly. And because money would move instantly to finance replacement capacity, Zorin's glorious global monopoly window might only last a matter of months, certainly not decades. Stock markets don't see catastrophe. They see opportunity. Now, let's imagine his plan would have become known, or would have actually been put into motion. Geopolitical isolation and premature industrial policy would automatically kick in. But what does that mean? How does that look like? The moment a connection to Zorin Industries was uncovered, his master plan, Operation Mainstrike, hits a brick wall of state power. Western governments would likely freeze his assets, impose crushing trade sanctions, and economically isolate him. Furthermore, post-disaster, if it had happened, defense spending and emergency military procurement programs would explode to secure the military supply chain. Zorin wouldn't destroy Western computing. Instead, he would force massive national security-driven semiconductor initiatives into existence decades early. Accidentally building the exact state-subsidized, highly resilient Western chip ecosystem he was trying to prevent in the first place. So, at the end of this, there is only one verdict. It's agreed Max Zorin was a brilliant psychopath, but a terrible economist. Operation Mainstrike would have cost billions to execute, fractured his own consumer ecosystem, and handed a massive victory to his Japanese competitors, and triggered a global capital realignment that would have completely locked him out of the market. So, in the end, James Bond didn't just save Silicon Valley and San Francisco. He actually saved Max Zorin from a very, very embarrassing, epic fail, an epic corporate bankruptcy. And then let him slip off Golden Gate Bridge. Yeah. It's interesting to think about these things once in a while. What plans of the villains actually have succeeded or not. If you like that sort of thing, I invite you to follow my channel, like and subscribe. Put something in the comments if you would like me to analyze another villain's plan and if it would have succeeded. I can think of some, but well, this one stood out. And I'm not really a tech kind of guy, so I have to research these things and actually read up on a lot of stuff. But it's very interesting, especially at a time where we are waiting for Amazon to make up their minds who the next James Bond will be and what he will avert in the world. So, hope to see you next time. Enjoy your day and keep on bonding. Bye-bye.